Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into the pretty intricate world of malicious software malware. We have a really comprehensive chapter here, and it serves as a bedrock, really, for understanding this complex domain, whether you're already deep in cybersecurity or, just starting out.
Exactly.
Our goal today is to dissect everything from the basic definition of malware to how it spreads, its stealth techniques, and maybe look at some key examples that have shaped the landscape.
That's right. In this chapter, it offers a very structured approach. It categorizes malware based on characteristics like how it spreads and what it's trying to achieve. It's a really invaluable framework.
Okay.
What's interesting, I think, is the chapter's point that even though vulnerabilities get patched, looking back at how past malware worked, even the ones that failed, teaches us critical lessons for today.
Right, those historical patterns, they often reveal enduring principles, don't they, in both attack and defense?
Precisely. These patterns repeat themselves.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack the essential concepts within this chapter. We want to equip you, the listener, with a richer understanding of the whole malware ecosystem, its nature, how it operates, and why it's such a persistent challenge.
Yeah, it's an ongoing battle.
Okay, let's get right into it then. At its core, what actually defines something as malware?
Well, fundamentally, malicious software is any software that's intentionally designed or deployed to produce effects that are detrimental, bad for the interests of users, system owners, or admins.
Okay.
This could mean anything from corrupting data, damaging hardware components, to compromising privacy. The absolute key element here is the intent behind it.
That intent, that's the crucial difference, isn't it? We all deal with software bugs that cause problems, but that's not what we're talking about here.
Exactly. We're focused on the deliberate creation, the planned negative outcomes.
Right.
Generally, a user, if they were fully aware of what a piece of software really did, its consequences, well, they wouldn't run it.
Makes sense.
So malware often works by bypassing that informed consent, using deception. It's important to distinguish it from, say, just harmful software, which might cause damage by accident due to bugs, not malice.
Right. Bad code versus bad intent.
Yes. Though the chapter makes a good point. Any technique benign software uses to interact with a system can potentially be leveraged maliciously too.
So how does this intentionally harmful software actually get onto our devices? It often feels, a bit mysterious.
There are quite a few ways, actually. Websites are a huge distribution vector.
How so?
Think phishing emails with dodgy links, search results manipulated to point to bad sites, even ads on legitimate sites that secretly redirect you. And we'll get into farming later, which messes with the internet's address book, basically.
Those sound like the more direct methods. What about less obvious ways?
Well, sometimes the software you choose to download is the problem. A legitimate program might get bundled with malware without you knowing. Or you get tricked into installing something that looks harmless but isn't.
The Trojan horse idea.
Exactly. Or it might have hidden malicious features.
Yeah.
Then you've got drive-by downloads. That's particularly nasty.
Explain that one.
Simply visiting a compromised website can trigger a silent software install. It usually exploits vulnerabilities in your browser or maybe plugins you have installed. Malicious active content, like scripts embedded in pages, can also be an entry point.
So it's not just about clicking bad links. Just visiting can be enough sometimes.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not just web browsing either.
Right.
Worms, for example, they can spread by exploiting weaknesses in network communication services themselves. Often doesn't require any user interaction at all beyond just being connected to the network.
Okay, that's scary.
Then you have traditional viruses, often spread via malicious email attachments that users are tricked, socially engineered into opening. We also have to consider insider threats, the schoolers. Malware slipped into code repositories during development, or even supply chain risks, where malicious firmware or hardware gets built into devices before you even buy them.
Wow. That's a lot of ways in. It really highlights the multitude of attack vectors. Now, the chapter also asks, why is malware so hard to detect? It's not exactly behaving normally.
Right, and what's insightful here is that the definition of malware can be, well, context dependent.
How do you mean?
The chapter uses the example of an SSH server. It's a legitimate tool for remote admin, right?
Sure.
But if an attacker secretly installs it to get unauthorized access, then in that context, it becomes malicious. It's not just about the software's function itself.
Okay, so context matters. What else?
Beyond that, there's a pretty significant theoretical result in computer science.
Yeah.
It basically proves that perfectly identifying all possible malware is an undecidable problem.
Undecidable. That sounds fundamental. Why is that such a barrier?
Well, the proof in essence, shows you can't create one single program or algorithm that can correctly identify every single piece of malware now and forever. The chapter mentions a proof by contradiction. If you assume a perfect detector exists, you can then logically construct a new program that this perfect detector will always get wrong.
Yeah.
It tells us our defenses will always be, well, probabilistic. We can catch many, but never all.
That's a profound limitation. It explains why this is a constant cat and mouse game. So, okay, perfect detection is impossible. What about preventing installation? Is that easier?
Well, given the detection difficulty, perfect prevention is also extremely challenging.
Yeah.
You can restrict software installations, sure, and that reduces the attack surface.
Oh.
But as the chapter notes, it's often inconvenient. Users generally don't like being heavily restricted.
Yeah, I can see that.
User education is helpful, definitely.
Yeah.
Making people aware of social engineering helps. But it's not a silver bullet against sophisticated threats.
Right, the human element. Always a factor.
Precisely. Technologies like code signing, where you can verify the software's origin and integrity, add a layer of defense. And of course, antivirus, anti-malware tools, intrusion detection systems, they are partial solutions constantly being updated.
In the last resort.
In severe cases, yeah, a full OS reinstall might be the only guarantee. Though, as the chapter kind of dryly points out, that means potential data loss if you don't have good backups.
It's always a trade-off, isn't it? The chapter mentions how the ease of software installation, this rapid software churn, has kind of inadvertently opened doors for malware.
It's a real tension between usability and security, the things that make installing and updating software easy for users. Well, they also create opportunities for attackers to trick people.
Right.
Add to that, there often aren't clear, reliable signals for users to tell a trustworthy download source from a malicious one. This constant cycle of updates, while needed for security patches, also means the goalposts are always moving for both sides.
Feels like a perpetual arms race.
Yeah. Okay, let's shift to some foundational malware types, viruses and worms. Often the first things people think of. They were definitely among the earliest, most notorious types. And they share that key characteristic, propagation. They're designed to replicate and spread.
Okay.
Now, a computer virus, famously defined by Fred Cohen, is a program that infects other programs or files. It modifies them to include a copy of itself, possibly an evolved version.
So it's like it hijacks legitimate software, kind of like a biological virus needing a host cell.
That's a really good analogy, actually. A typical virus spreads by attaching to other executables on the same machine.
And between machines.
That usually needs some human help sharing infected USB drives, opening a malicious email attachment with an infected executable inside.
How does it work technically?
It basically embeds its code into the host program and changes things so its own code runs first when the host is executed. After the virus code runs, it usually jumps to the original program's starting point so the host can still run.
Try to be subtle.
Right. And viruses usually check if a file is already infected to avoid, infecting it over and over, which might make it more obvious.
And worms are different because they don't need to attach to another program.
Precisely. Worms differ in three main ways. First, they propagate automatically, continuously, often without any user interaction after the initial infection.
Okay.
Second, they spread across networks using protocols and services, not by infecting existing host programs first. They're self-contained explorers, basically.
Got it.
And third, worms typically exploit software vulnerabilities, like buffer overflows in network services, to get in and spread. Viruses, on the other hand, often abuse existing software features or use social engineering to get the user to run the infected host program.
So worms can potentially spread much faster and more independently.
Exactly. Because they don't have that waiting period, waiting for a user to run the host program, they tend to spread much more quickly.
And cause more disruption.
Their self-propagation across networks can lead to rapid saturation.
Yeah.
They can cause denial of service just from network congestion and system overload, even if destruction isn't their main goal. That's why they're often called network worms or network viruses.
The chapter also mentions email-based malware, which sort of blurs the lines.
Yeah, things like email viruses, email worms, mass mailing worm viruses, they mix characteristics. They use email to spread infecting email client files using malicious attachments. Users get tricked into leveraging email client features, often default ones.
So still needing some user action initially.
Typically, yes. Like opening the email client or the message itself. The social engineering is key here. A common tactic is grabbing addresses from the victim's address book to automatically email itself out to many more people.
So using email as a transport for either virus-like infection or worm-like spreading.
Exactly. But it's crucial to remember both viruses and worms are just software at the end of the day. They have the same power as any other program. And if they get elevated privileges, they can do some really complex, damaging things.
That brings us to how program file viruses actually insert themselves. Figure 7.1 in the chapter shows a few strategies.
Yeah, it's a good visual. One method is shift and prepend. The virus code goes at the start of the host file, pushing the original code down.
Increases the file size then.
Inevitably, yes. The virus modifies the entry point to run its code first, then jumps to the original code. Another way is just appending the virus to the end of the file.
Simpler.
Can be, especially if the file format has a clear entry point. The virus changes the host's initial jump instruction to point to the virus code first, then the virus jumps back to the original entry point after it runs.
Those seem fairly direct. Are there more destructive or sneaky methods?
Well, one is just overwriting the host file from the beginning. Destroys the original program, makes it obvious something's wrong, and hard to recover the original.
Right.
Maybe more insidious is overwriting from somewhere in the middle. Still damages the program, but might evade simple scanners that only check the start and end of files.
Clever, in a bad way.
There are other variations too, moving bits of the original code around, using temporary files. It gets complex, especially with binary executables where you have to adjust memory addresses if you move code. Less tricky with simple scripts.
The chapter also mentions an alternative definition of a virus, focusing more on self-replication itself.
Yes, Skurser defines it more broadly as a program that recursively and explicitly copies itself, maybe evolving as it does. This covers things like companion viruses.
Companion viruses.
They don't embed directly. They might create a malicious file with the same name as a legit program, but with an extension the OS runs first, like .com before .exe in older systems. User tries to run the legit program, runs the virus instead, which then might run the original program afterwards. Clever trick using system behavior.
Let's talk about some specific historical viruses. The Brain virus, 1986, the first PC boot sector virus. What was its deal?
Brain was a landmark, yeah. Targeted the boot sector. Back then, PCs often booted from floppy disks. The BIOS read the first sector of the floppy to start things up.
And Brain replaced that.
It overwrote or replaced that boot code with its own. So insert an infected floppy, boot up, and the virus runs before the OS even loads.
Was it very destructive?
Not intentionally, really. It sometimes messed up the floppy's file allocation table, causing data loss, but that seemed accidental. Oddly, it contained contact info, phone number, address in Pakistan for the creators, offering vaccination.
Weird.
It also had basic stealth. Like an early rootkit, it would show you the original boot sector if you tried to read the infected one, hiding itself.
Yeah.
Later viruses targeted the hard disk's master boot record, the MBR, as hard drives became standard.
Then there was CIH, or Chernobyl, in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Much nastier.
Oh yeah, CIH was seriously destructive. Hit Windows 95, 98, ME systems hard, especially in Asia around 98 to 2000. It showed malware could cause actual hardware damage.
How?
It tried to overwrite critical hard disk sectors, like the partition table, basically bricking the drive, requiring reformat, total data loss.
Ouch.
Even worse, it attempted to write to the system BIOS firmware. On some common BIOS chips back then, it worked, corrupting the BIOS, stopping the computer from even starting. You'd need to physically reprogram or replace the chip.
And it had a tricky infection method.
Right, nicknamed space filler. It inserted itself into unused gaps within executable files, sometimes splitting its code. This evaded simple detection methods based on file size changes.
The chapter also brings up data file viruses. Seems very relevant now with complex documents.
Absolutely. Modern documents aren't just static text or images anymore. They have embedded scripts, active content. When you open one, the application essentially executes that content.
Creating risks.
Two main types. First, a crafted document could exploit a vulnerability in the program used to open it, like a PDF reader or word processor, leading to a traditional virus infection on the host.
Okay.
Second, malware can spread via templates and macros within documents. Open an infected template or a document with malicious macros the code runs, potentially infecting other files or spreading when you share the document. Think Concept or Melissa from the late 90s early macro viruses. Melissa spread like wildfire via email, causing huge disruption even without a destructive payload. We still see malware in PDS and other docs today.
It's clear detecting all these is a huge challenge. And you mentioned earlier the chapter argues perfect detection is theoretically impossible.
Yes, that proof by contradiction is fundamental. Assume a perfect virus detector exists, and you can construct code that fools it. It means we can never have a 100% guaranteed detection method.
So it's always an arms race. But obviously, we do detect a lot of malware. What are the main practical methods used in antivirus today?
Well, a cornerstone is still signature-based detection. You analyze known malware, find unique byte sequences, signatures specific to it.
Like a fingerprint.
Kind of. These signatures are tested against huge databases of clean software to avoid false positives. AV software keeps an updated list of these signatures and scans files, usually before execution, looking for matches using fast pattern matching. It's a denialist approach block, known bad stuff.
Makes sense for known threats. What about new, unseen malware? 0 days.
That's where heuristics and behavioral detection come in. Allow listing is the opposite approach. Maintain a list of known good files, often using cryptographic hashes to check integrity. If a file's hash isn't on the list, it's suspicious.
Okay.
Digital signatures from trusted vendors serve a similar purpose, verifying authenticity. Behavioral signatures look for suspicious actions, trying to modify system files, disable security software, connect to weird network locations, encrypt lots of files suddenly.
So looking for patterns of bad behavior.
Exactly. And more advanced techniques involve sandboxing or emulation. Run the suspicious program briefly in an isolated, controlled environment and watch what it does without risking the real system. This is good for catching malware that tries to hide itself using encryption or obfuscation until it runs.
It's a layered defense. Signatures for known threats, behavior analysis, and sandboxing for the unknown. Okay, let's get into the tactics malware uses to evade detection and how worms try to spread super fast. Sounds like leapfrog.
It absolutely is. Virus writers use lots of tricks. A basic one is encrypting the main virus code, maybe with a fixed key, maybe symmetric encryption.
But the decryptor part has to be unencrypted, right?
Right, and that little decryption routine becomes a potential signature itself. So to make it harder, they might change the encryption key with each new infection.
Okay, makes simple signatures harder. What's the next level up?
Polymorphic viruses. They also encrypt the main body with a different key each time. But they go further. They mutate the decryption routine itself.
Ow!
Using a mutation engine. It generates different but functionally identical decryptors each time. Simpler ones might just pick from a pool of pre-made decryptors. Advanced ones use a mini-compiler to create tons of variations, reordering code, swapping equivalent instructions, adding useless junk code.
Makes finding a signature for the decryptor really tough.
Much harder. Though once it decrypts itself in memory to run, the core malicious code might still be detectable.
Yeah.
That's why emulators that pre-run the code are useful. They can see it after decryption.
So hiding the payload, changing the key, and changing the lock itself. What else?
Another tactic is using an external decryption key. Store it somewhere else, another file, a remote server, maybe generate it based on the host system somewhere.
Yeah.
Or retrieve it from the network. Then you have metamorphic viruses. These are really sophisticated. No encryption. Instead, the virus completely rewrites its own code with each infection.
Rewrites itself.
Yeah, mutates the main code and the mutation engine itself. Each generation is structurally very different. The really fancy ones might even carry source code and use the host's compiler tools to help rewrite themselves into highly varied forms.
That sounds incredibly hard to detect, like trying to catch a shapeshifter.
It is. And beyond code tricks, malware uses other tactics to hide, messing with file timestamps, hiding flags, putting code in weird memory locations, hiding processes from task managers, keeping resource use low to avoid suspicion. These overlap a lot with rootkit techniques, which we'll get to.
Oh.
And because of all this obfuscation and encryption, reverse engineering is a critical skill for the antivirus industry. Analysts have to painstakingly pull this code apart to understand it, find ways to detect it, and figure out how to remove it.
Now, shifting to worms, they aim for rapid spread across networks, not just finding vulnerable systems, but doing it fast.
Exactly. Unlike viruses, worms live on the network. A basic worm might just randomly scan IP address ranges, hoping to find vulnerable hosts. But advanced ones use smarter scanning.
Like what?
Localized scanning. Code Red 2, for instance, preferred scanning IPs in the same larger network blocks, 16, 8, as the machine it was on. The idea is nearby machines might be similar, maybe vulnerable.
Makes sense.
Then there's context-aware scanning. The worm digs through info on the infected host email address books, P2P file lists, browser history, bookmarks, network settings, looking for leads on potential new targets.
So the infected machine becomes a scout for the worm. What about even faster spreading strategies?
Researchers found several. Hit list scanning. Start with a pre-made list of likely vulnerable hosts. Get a rapid initial spread before defenses can react.
Right.
Permutation scanning. Use a fixed pseudo-random order for scanning IPs. Each new infection starts scanning at a different random point in the list. If it finds an already infected host, it jumps to another random point, reduces redundant scanning,
Efficient.
and then internet-scale hit lists. Basically, pre-generate a list of most internet servers. If your worm targets a specific server platform vulnerability, you can hit almost all potential victims globally very quickly.
Wow.
Yeah, estimates back in the early 2000s suggested a hypothetical flash worm using these techniques could infect all vulnerable hosts online in seconds, faster than any human response.
That's alarming. Reminds me of the 1988 internet worm, the Morris worm, and an early big wake-up call.
Indeed. The Morris worm didn't have a destructive payload, but it infected about 10% of internet hosts back then, mostly specific Sun and VRX Unix systems.
And caused chaos anyway.
Yeah, just the sheer traffic and resource consumption crashed systems and clogged networks, causing widespread denial of service. Once it got in, a small bootstrap part would download the rest of the worm, sometimes even source code it would compile locally.
Yeah.
It also tried some basic hiding tricks.
And it famously used multiple exploits, right? Not just one trick.
Key point. It used 4 different weaknesses: a buffer overflow unfingered, a debug backdoor accidentally left in sendmail, password guessing against etc. using regzec, and abusing trusted host setups at joists.igwiv via ishish.
Write the toolkit.
It was a major wake-up call, yeah. Showed the potential for widespread disruption. Kind of ironic, one recovery step was changing all passwords.
Yeah.
Fast forward to Yahoo's massive 2016 breach, same advice. Change your passwords. Makes you wonder how much progress we've really made on some fundamentals.
It really does. Okay, let's turn to stealthy malware. The chapter groups these by goals and methods, starting with the classic Trojan horse.
Yeah, the analogy holds up well. A software Trojan horse looks like it does something useful, but secretly does malicious things in the background, without the user knowing.
So deception is key.
Exactly. The malicious part might run alongside the good part, or the good part might be fake, just a disguise. They often get installed via deception, fake software updates, bundled with free screensavers or utilities.
So the user is tricked into installing it, thinking it's something else, or something harmless.
That's the typical Trojan scenario. Once installed, it might look normal while stealing data or installing a backdoor quietly. The bad stuff might happen immediately or be delayed. If malware gets installed totally silently, without the user doing anything, we usually don't call that a Trojan. Trojans imply the user was somehow persuaded to run it, even if deceived about its true nature.
Then we have backdoors. Persistent hidden access sounds really bad.
It is. A backdoor is basically a secret way to bypass normal login and access controls. It gives attackers ongoing, stealthy remote access, often via a hidden network service they can connect to.
Can they be standalone?
They could be standalone programs or embedded in legit software. They're often part of Trojans and rootkits, a way for the attacker to keep control. Once a backdoor's there, they can do install more malware like remote access Trojans, RATs, steal data, launch more attacks.
Which leads us to rootkits, all about deep hiding and control.
Right. A rootkit is a set of tools installed secretly to hide its own presence and the presence of other malware. It aims for privileged access and actively conceals its activities from the user and security tools.
So hiding and control are the main goals.
Those are the defining features distinguishing them. The ultimate goal is usually to enable some other malicious payload like a backdoor, keylogger, or surveillance tools to operate long-term without being detected.
The chapter distinguishes user mode and kernel mode rootkits. What's the difference in impact?
Okay, rootkit comes from Unix root, the superuser. When malware started compromising the OS kernel itself, the term stuck, but it can be a bit confusing.
How so?
Kernel mode is the OS's privileged execution level, direct access to hardware, all memory. User mode is restricted, where most apps run. A user mode rootkit runs in user space, maybe with admin rights, but can't directly touch the kernel. It hides by messing with system calls and data within user space.
And kernel mode.
A kernel mode rootkit runs in kernel space. It's compromised the OS core. That gives it way more power and makes it much, much harder to detect and remove because it can control the very tools you'd use to find it. So rootkit might sound like just getting root privileges, but a kernel rootkit is a much deeper compromise.
So the rootkit is the attacker's persistent agent, keeping the door open and hiding their tracks.
Exactly. From the victim's view, it's malicious. From the attackers, it's the tool they deploy to stay hidden and run their payloads, long-term backdoors, keyloggers, spyware, maybe using the system for crypto mining silently.
Its success depends on staying hidden.
Right. Installation, staying hidden, and enabling the payload. If the payload is obvious, like ransomware locking files, it blows the stealth. But the rootkit's persistence features can still make cleanup really hard. Often, the initial infection method is seen as separate from the rootkit itself. which is defined by that hiding and control aspect. Think of them as post-intrusion tools.
Let's get technical on rootkits. System call hijacking. How does that work?
Okay, user programs can't directly access kernel memory or hardware. They ask the kernel via system calls. These requests go through OS services, shared libraries, which then invoke the kernel functions. The OS uses tables, service address tables, or dispatch tables to map service names to the actual function addresses in the kernel.
And rootkits mess with these tables.
Exactly. A kernel rootkit with its high privileges can change entries in these tables. So when a program makes a system call, instead of going to the real kernel function, it gets redirected to the rootkit's code, right, the hook. The rootkit code can do its bad stuff, maybe call the original function too, and then filter or change the results before sending them back to the user program. This is hooking. Legitimate software, like AV, uses hooking too for monitoring.
Are there other ways to hijack calls?
Sure. A rootkit could just overwrite the actual code of the target system call in kernel memory. Or, more drastically, replace the entire dispatch table with its own fake one.
The chapter mentions specifics for Windows, like SSDT and IAT.
Yeah, in Windows, the System Service Dispatch Table, SSDT, is the main kernel mode table for system calls. User mode rootkits often target the import address table, IAT, which is in each process's memory and in DLLs, listing addresses of functions imported from other DLLs. Modifying the IAT lets a rootkit intercept calls within that specific process or users of that DLL. Interestingly, unlike Unix, Windows core system call interfaces, the native API, aren't officially documented publicly.
What about hooking that doesn't mess with tables? Inline hooking.
Right, inline hooking modifies the target function's code directly, often uses detour patching. The rootkit puts a jump instruction at the very start of the target function, redirecting execution to the rootkit's detour code.
And then?
The detour code does its thing, then might jump back to the original function using a small trampoline function that executes the instruction overwritten by the initial jump. Allows complex pre- and post-processing. Detecting table hooking might involve checking table addresses, but detecting inline hooking needs integrity checks on the function code itself, like hashing it.
So rootkits use really clever tricks to redirect system functions. What about hiding their own files or processes? Kernel object modification.
Exactly. Direct kernel object modification, or DKOM. Since a kernel rootkit runs with full privileges, it can directly write to kernel memory and alter the kernel's internal data structures.
Like what?
It can remove its own process from the kernel's list of running processes, making it invisible to task managers. It could change its process UID to 0, root system, hide its files or network connections from listings, conceal loaded kernel modules, erase itself from system logs. Anything the kernel tracks, it can potentially modify directly.
See.
Another way is intercepting system calls that report system state. Hook the call, get the results, prune out anything related to the rootkit, then return the cleaned up results to the application.
Okay, deep hiding techniques.
Yeah.
But how do kernel rootkits get installed initially? Seems like a high bar.
Several ways. One is tricking an admin into installing a malicious kernel module, like a fake device driver, using the normal LKM loadable kernel module mechanisms.
Okay.
Another is exploiting a vulnerability in existing kernel code, a buffer overflow in a kernel-level network service, maybe a parsing bug. Success means injecting code directly into the kernel.
More complex routes.
Modifying the boot process, a rogue bootloader that alters the kernel before it starts. Theoretically, modifying kernel memory swap to disk if it's user-writable, or using direct memory access, DMA, via hardware devices, video cards, network cards to write directly into kernel memory, bypassing OS protections if DMA isn't properly secured.
Loadable kernel modules seem like a convenient entry point for attackers.
They can be. LKMs let you add functionality, drivers, syscalls, to a running kernel dynamically. Very flexible. But in many OS designs, there's no strong memory isolation between kernel components. So compromise one part, like a malicious LKM, and you might control all of kernel memory. This relates to security principles like isolated compartments and least privilege. Linux capabilities try to add finer-grained privileges in user space, which helps.
We focused on kernel rootkits. What about user mode ones? How do they hide without kernel access?
User mode rootkits run in user space. On systems like Windows, they often hook resource enumeration APIs, the functions apps use to ask the OS for lists of processes, files, network connections, etc.
How does that work?
The rootkit hooks these API calls within the target application's memory, or in shared libraries, DLLs. When the app asks for, say, a list of processes, the rootkit intercepts the call, filters out its own malicious process from the list, and returns the modified list to the app.
So it's like kernel hooking, but happening entirely in user space.
Pretty much. Affects only the apps using those hooked APIs or libraries. It doesn't compromise the kernel itself.
Sounds less powerful overall, but maybe easier to deploy, and maybe harder for a regular user to spot.
Often easier to deploy, yeah, as they don't usually need kernel exploits. Less system-wide control, but still effective at hiding from standard user tools. Interestingly, the chapter notes that back in 2005, most reported rootkits were user mode ones. Detecting them sometimes involves comparing results from different APIs that should show the same info discrepancies, can reveal filtering.
Okay, moving on. Drive-by downloads. Exploiting web browsers sounds particularly insidious.
They are very stealthy. They exploit the interaction between browsers and servers and the fact that web pages can contain active content like JavaScript. When your browser loads a page with scripts, it runs them. That's its job. So visiting the page implicitly authorizes running the embedded content, even if it's malicious and injected by an attacker.
So just visiting a compromised site can be enough. No clicking needed.
That's the core idea. Usually it's two things: a vulnerability in your browser or a plugin, and malicious script injected into a web page, often on a compromised server. Visit the page, the script runs, exploits the flaw, and silently downloads and runs malware. User might not notice a thing.
How does the malicious script get onto the legitimate page?
Several ways. Malicious ads served by third-party networks are a big one. Compromised web widgets like weather tools, user-submitted content on forums or comment sections where attackers inject scripts, even malicious parameters and links, maybe in HTML emails.
And these scripts often redirect you elsewhere first.
Frequently. A small injected script might silently bounce your browser to an attacker's site, maybe through a few hops to hide the trail, before landing on a site that actually exploits the browser flaw and drops the malware. The original legit site might only host that initial redirect script. It happens fast, often invisibly using things like zero-pixel iframes.
So drive-by downloads aren't a type of malware, but a delivery method.
Exactly. A deployment means can install anything: keyloggers, backdoors, rootkits, botnet zombies. It's a pull model. Victim pulls the malware by visiting. Contrast with the push model of worms actively seeking targets.
The chapter also mentions droppers or downloaders. How do they fit in?
A dropper is malware whose main job is to install other malware, the real payload. It might download extra pieces from a remote server, might install a backdoor to help with downloads or future updates. The initial package, maybe dropper plus encrypted payload, is sometimes called the egg. Droppers can arrive via any method: virus, worm, drive-by, Trojan. Babylonia virus back in '99 was an early example, downloaded extra files after infection. Foreshadowed later botnet stuff.
We're getting near the end here. Let's quickly cover ransomware and botnets, huge threats today.
Ransomware is all about extortion. Compromise the system, often communicate with attacker servers. Common type encrypts your files, demands payment, often crypto, for the decryption key.
And removing the ransomware doesn't fix the encrypted files.
Nope. The data's scrambled. That's why regular offline backups are the best defense. Ransomware can arrive via Trojans, email, drive-bys, etc.
And they use strong encryption.
Often, yeah. Many use asymmetric crypto. Attackers have a public-private key pair. Ransomware in your machine generates a random symmetric key, encrypts your files with that, then encrypts the symmetric key with the attacker's public key, deletes the original symmetric key. Ransom note shows the encrypted symmetric key, tells you how to pay to get the attacker's private key to decrypt it.
Nasty. Are there non-encrypting types?
Yes. Some just lock access to files, threaten deletion, fake encryption, or lock the whole OS until ransom is paid. Often use rootkit features to make removal hard. WannaCry in 2017 was a huge example, a crypto worm hitting hundreds of thousands of Windows machines globally. Used RSA and AES encryption.
Botnets, too. Networks of compromised machines controlled by attackers sounds terrifying.
It is. A botnet is a network of infected computers, bots, or zombies remotely controlled by a bot herder. They can be huge, hundreds of thousands or millions of machines. Owners often have no idea.
What are they used for?
Major role in cybercrime. Spreading more malware, launching massive distributed denial of service, DDoS attacks, sending spam and phishing emails, installing keyloggers to steal credentials and financial data. Botnets are even rented out.
How do the herders control them all?
Early ones use centralized command and control, CNC, often IRC channels, but that's a single point of failure. Shut down the server, botnet disrupted.
So they evolved.
Yeah. More modern ones use decentralized peer-to-peer, P2P communication. Bots talk to each other. More resilient.
Yeah.
Can also use multi-tiered hierarchies to hide the herder. And they use tricks like dynamic DNS for CNC servers to make takedowns harder.
The chapter also quickly mentions zero-day exploits and logic bombs.
A zero-day exploit attacks a vulnerability unknown to the vendor and public. 0 days for the vendor to fix it. Big advantage for attackers is there's no patch. Needs detection, analysis, patching takes time.
And logic bombs.
Code hidden in a program set to trigger malicious action only when specific conditions are met, certain date, time bomb, users logs in, account deleted, whatever. Structure is like a virus worm payload trigger. You could argue almost all malware is a logic bomb, where the trigger is just run now. Spreads like any other malware.
And briefly, rabbit and Easter egg.
Rabbit sometimes means malware that replicates super fast, eating resources, CPU, memory, crashing the system. Or a worm that hops fast but maybe removes itself from the previous host. An Easter egg isn't malware. It's a harmless, hidden feature developers put in software, accessed in a non-standard way. Benign Trojan, basically.
Quite the zoo of threats.
Yeah.
The final section looks at social engineering's role and ways to categorize malware.
Social engineering tricking people is vital for many malware attacks. Convincing users to run malicious files is classic.
Yeah.
Happy 99 email worm was an early example, seemed harmless, tricked people into running the attachment. OEC's hiding file extensions by default can help attackers disguise executables. And just double-clicking a file often means running it with your user privileges. Attackers rely on users enabling execution this way.
And rich email or compressed files also get exploited.
Absolutely. Email evolving from text to HTML with scripts open new attack vectors. Early clients sometimes ran scripts automatically just on preview. Modern clients are much safer, disabling scripts, asking before loading images. Compressed files like .zip, .rar, especially self-extracting .sfx files, can hide malicious executables and scripts that run automatically on extraction or done. Essentially, users often don't realize what they're authorizing.
Finally, the chapter classifies malware by objectives and
You can hit,
helps structure things.
yeah, objectives tell you the motive, damage, data theft, software, like credentials, financial info, direct profit, ransomware, malware rental, surveillance, key logging, mics, cams, spreading more malware, controlling resources, botnets, crypto mining.
And technical properties.
Looks at characteristics. Does it self-replicate? Breed. Need a host program? Is it stealthy? How does it infect? Network, user help, social engineering, insider. Is it transient or persistent? Table 7.2 summarizes this for major types: virus, worm, Trojan, backdoor, rootkit, keylogger, ransomware, drive-by. A good framework for this complex world.
Well, that was an incredibly detailed deep dive. We've covered a huge amount. Definitions, history, propagation, evasion, objectives. It's clearly a constantly shifting battleground.
It is. And understanding these core concepts is essential for anyone online today. What's really key is that it's not just technical human behavior. Social engineering is deeply involved. It's a constant race between attackers and defenders.
So as we wrap up, thinking about the increasing sophistication and how connected everything is, what unforeseen challenges might the future of malware hold? That's definitely something for you, our listeners, to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.